Good to see everyone. Um, yeah, so I intentionally named this Ruptures and Repairs. And, just as I have had the opportunity of working with lots of families and couples with substance use disorders over the years, I think I've really seen like this kind of ongoing dynamic of like ruptures happen, and so then how, as we as counselors, therapists, as CRSs, I'm not sure all of your different backgrounds, but how do we help facilitate repairs, right? And currently I'm working with a couple, and one of them started talking about, hey, I was hoping that you were gonna make literally the argument, make the bacon for dinner tonight. Well, I'm tired. I thought you were gonna make the bacon for dinner tonight, right? And then within minutes, the conversation was around like, well, I'm trying to be a great father, and I feel like you're saying that I'm not. Right. And to me, what I hear in that is like, there's definitely a rupture around like the narratives that we have that has occurred. There's been a rupture around the narratives around like how we show up as parents in that relationship, right? So it becomes my job to help facilitate a repair. And so today I kind of wanted to share like some of those tools that I've learned that helps us facilitate repairs. Um, so to share a little bit about me, I'm married, been married for 4 or so years, together with all in with my partner for about 9. Um, I love animals. We actually have 4, but we have one black cat who like is so elusive that I only see her at night, and I couldn't find any pictures of her. But we have a dog and a couple of cats. We love hiking. We love spending time in nature. I love sitting out in my backyard, which is not pictured here. But I also really enjoy baking on the right side. I think that was like a meringue or a tart of something that I made last year. And so I just like wanted to share a little bit about me. Like the work we do is so human, right? And this is about helping people. And I think sometimes we get lost in the humanity of all of it. So I wanted to start with the humanity before we got into any practice. Um, a couple of reminders. I guess this is webinar, so it's not as let me see if I can click something here. No, yeah. And my biggest ask for all of you is ask questions. I know somebody's already posted in the QA. I think the chat might be disabled, but I think it's easier for us to just add stuff into the QA. Margaret, so I know you asked. So please add questions in the QA. I will stop in the middle and answer questions as they're coming up. And we can kind of like make this somewhat of a dialogue. So please ask questions. And I actually talked a little bit about it at the beginning. I know some people are still trickling in, but CEs will be discussed at the end. Okay, enough. Let's get into it. Our agenda today, we've already covered 1 and 2. We're going to talk a little bit about theory. I find that theory really helps ground us in the what we do. Um, we're gonna have a 5-minute stretch break because me talking for 2 hours is not good for me or for all of you. So we'll do like a really tight 5-minute, get up, go to the bathroom, grab some water, and we're gonna come back, and the rest of time will be spent on interventions and techniques. At the very end, I will leave probably about 10 minutes, 15 to 10 minutes, to answer any questions, to go back over anything, and then hand it over to Ashley, to talk about next steps for any continuing education. So yeah, so I want to start just to make sure we all have kind of this shared language, and I say this intentionally because this is something I do a lot in my work as well, is making sure we all have just a common language we're pulling from. S- so many of us grow up in different environments, different backgrounds, different cultures, right? And so like the language that I use might not resonate with the language of people that I'm working with. It might not work with people in my family, right? Generations have very different language. And so I'm also just trying to like spend a minute to make sure that during this time, we're kind of making sure that we have some of that shared language. So CSO, you will see CSO is used throughout. It stands for concerned significant other. You might be a CSO for many different reasons, for many different relationships, right? It could be about health and the context of craft, where a lot of this comes from. CSO is really focused on, um, that I have a loved one and I'm concerned about them because they're drinking, their substance use, their, whatever the behavior might be. Um, so this is not craft specific. Craft uses identified patient, but I add in LO for loved one, and it's language that we developed some years back that we thought resonated more, right? If I'm a concerned significant other, it's because I love somebody, and that's where my concern is coming from, right? IP to me always felt like way too sterile and clinical and maybe even pejorative. So I stayed away from identified patient and focused on loved one. And substance, I will be very broad in my definition of substance, and it's any psychoactive substance, including caffeine and nicotine. I've had clients come to me really interested in smoking cessation, right? They don't like the routine, they have consequences as a result of that behavior, they're motivated for it. It's causing schisms within a relationship with their partner. I've had two couples coming to me about smoking cessation. And so I'm really intentional about substance because I don't know what substances you're currently using. Um, so the problem. I imagine all of us here on the call know the problem, but just to really lay it out, right? This is updated from 2023 CDC data. So we know that in 2023 that we had about 48.5 million people who meet criteria for substance use disorders. That's the DSM-5 criterion, right? So if you look at the criteria just for meeting moderate or mild, the threshold is really low for those individuals. But I say low, lots of people are engaging in behaviors where we're drinking multiple times a week, right? And so substance use disorders, a lot of times we think about that severe only category, but I challenge us to think about the broad spectrum of substance use disorders. Um, this is huge. I didn't add in the original fact, but it used to be about 2%. We have seen with a lot of the um, kind of just changes in how we've been treating substance use and like the renewed focus on it. 26% of people with an SUD received any treatment in 2019. And so for me, that tells me our federal programs are working or were working till that funding has been cut. It tells me that stigma has been challenged, right? It tells me that there's accessibility that is being provided around treatment for individuals. If we look at to that 48.5 million, we know, and there's no like firm, you're not going to find anybody, that has a crisp number on this, but 100 million plus families have a loved one with a substance use disorder, right? When we start to think about all of the first generation individuals that have a sibling, a grand or a parent, or a child that have a substance use disorder, when we start to like look at all those family systems, we see 100 plus million impacted individuals on average. Um, and then lastly, overdose fatalities in 2024. This is preliminary data. This has not been finalized from the CDC, but we see about a 27% decrease from 2023. So again, what we have been doing is working. Harm reduction is working, right? Abstinence-based program. It is the totality and not any single thing that leads to significant changes. Like 27% change in public health is a huge win. So just a moment to celebrate all of that success, but also we still have a huge problem. So what's happening to the other 74%, right? What about those 80,000 individuals that are dying from overdose fatalities? And that's only from opioid use. I did not factor in the hundreds of thousands of alcohol use related deaths that we see every year as well. Um, so I'm gonna have a little bit of a theme. I love Ted Lasso. I find a lot of like the motifs and narratives through Ted Lasso to be really engaging. And I just wanted to start, if you take nothing away from this, this is the thing that I really hope to share, is that people have to believe that change is possible. At its fundamental level, people have to believe that change is possible. So I love this quote, right? You've got the believe sign there, and see, I believe in hope, I believe in belief, right? one of the things that people come to us with is a lack of hope that anything will change, right? I've been dealing with my son, my daughter, my sibling for 8 years, and we've gone to treatments and they come out and nothing changes. And I really want them to change. I think all these consequences should matter, and nothing is having a significant impact. And so a lot of times the first things families come to is with no hope. Our job is to say people can always change. If you don't believe that, you shouldn't be in this field, right? We have to believe that change happens. I know as a therapist, a big part of my training was creating a theory of change, right? Like, what is my individual belief and how people change? That belief structure has changed a lot over the years, right? But from that starting point, I really believe that people change through finding nurturance and through finding support, and then being able to anchor into a community. Right now, I also have layered in a little bit more with some specific training for motivational interviewing, where I also believe change can greatly be inspired through intrinsic value reorganization that we can support with as counselors. And change happens all the time, right? Change sometimes happens like that. Sometimes change happens over a really long period of time, right? Change happens. I'm trying to play the guitar again and I'm getting calluses on my fingers, right? Like there's biological change. People get older, our neuroplasticity changes, right? We have these ontological changes that are happening every day. We can also change our behavior. I can change my perspective, my cognition on something. I can change how I feel about something. So I just wanted to ground us in that, one of the biggest theories is that in our approach as a counselor, are we really instilling hope for people that are walking in the door? And if you're not, I really then challenge you to start there before you take out any of these other interventions. Our first job is to say change is possible. Um, and this is some language that we take from the Invitation to Change model from the Center for Motivation and Change, great resource. Uh, and they really like challenge us to think like, and to help families and ourselves really think about the why behind the what. So we focus a lot on the what, right? The what is I'm lying, I'm stealing. I, continue to use opioids, even though I've been told and have lots of consequences where I shouldn't be. I'm 16 and I'm, smoking marijuana every day, right? So we focus a lot on the behavior, the what, and our job, especially as helpers, is to help build up understanding around the why, right? Like, why does that behavior exist? What about this behavior is important to you? And so I start here because as counselors, we can ask the question, the why behind the what in terms of substance use, but we can also use theory to inform our why, right? And that's kind of where I want to spend a little bit of time. Um, I don't know where that came from. So here's one of my favorite charts. Data informs theory, right? Without data, we can get a little lost. So this is a study that was done 1999, so definitely outdated, but I think still shows significant enough evidence for like why we choose the different theories that we do. So on this chart, you're going to see percentages. You're going to see how long individuals stayed, it's a little hard, but stayed alignment with their goals. Most of these cases, it was abstinence from when they started treatment, right? So 6-month period, or 12-month period on the right side. If families were only going to Al-Anon, they saw that at 6 months, 13% of those individuals stayed, and at 12 months, 20%. So, you know, kind of interesting that you see people stay for longer. So, Al Anon, right? We don't really see it as like a true family intervention, but uh, we have to kind of add it in here because that's really all that's been offered. If we look at the Johnson intervention, and Johnson intervention is what we think of like, let's all come to a room, we're going to read letters, we're going to sit here and we're going to talk through it. We saw that people went to treatment and stayed, in their goals, at 30% and 35% respectively. So then CRAFT comes along, right? CRAFT stands for Community Reinforcement Family Training. We're going to talk more about it in a little bit. And the goal of craft was not, you need to go to treatment today. The goal of craft is to build relationships with people that you love about and then help them navigate change as a unit, right? So now we're using the family as the agent of change rather than the individual needs to be the agent of change. Al Anon largely is about boundaries, right? And actually distancing ourselves from relationships, which sometimes is important. That's not a bad thing. you know, relationships should be modulated, right? Kraft is saying that the closer we are to relationships, the better chance we have at influencing change. Al Anon is saying create distance, take care of yourself, and then through a period of time, hopefully enough cost outweigh the benefits of substance use. And so what we see here is that in terms of treatment retention, Kraft far outperforms. Like we don't see this type of significance ever. Sometimes we see like 3% significance, right? Or like 5%. With enough statistical power, we can believe that we have enough directionality. Here we don't need, right? Like we see the effect size or the effect change pretty clearly. Uh, so I also love this, right? So we're talking about, again, retention, and we're also looking at use of substances. So we're not even talking about treatment. Well, the first one is, but we're really more looking at individual substance use. So the light bar is craft. So they had families come in that were trained or like, they had a craft facilitator working with them. And then TAU stands for treatment as usual. So I'm going to go to my treatment program. It's not going to have craft, and I'm going to do their family support weekend, and then go on. Maybe there's no family support, and so they looked at first off how long were those individuals staying in treatment at a treatment program. 42% with craft versus 10% staying in treatment for the full duration. Average weekly opiate use, it's looking at percent of days, right? We see significant reductions in both drug use as a whole, which is the right side, and specific opiate use. So like this starts to paint the case for a lot of us that, hey, actually, coming to closer into relationships rather than distancing actually starts to make a case for like that might be a better approach for better outcomes with family members. This is also from a 2014 study, so pretty recent, right? Something we would still really consider to not be biased and hold up to current trends today. Um, I also love just talking about stigma for just a second, right? Uh, when I meet with families, substance use disorders are the most embarrassing thing that is happening in their life, right? They feel a tremendous amount of shame, and they really feel that it's on them, right? Like the outcomes that are happening here are on them. Um, there's this study that like really tried to look and kind of codify stigma. And so this is qualitative, right? Like shame is this like very qualitative human experience where, individuals, where they even understand cognitively that they are not responsible, often feel ashamed and embarrassed anyway, right? And think about like where all the elements of shame come from. Like even still to this day, I feel like substance use like needs to be like tucked away, put away in communities. It's like not front and center. We're starting to get better at like treatment facility billboards are front and center, but we're not good at like talking about just what does it mean and what is your experience as a loved one or as a CSO when your loved one's using substances and like where do I go and who do I talk to and like those small moments of like, oh well, how's Jack doing? and Jack's not doing great right now, right? And so like I feel this tremendous amount of embarrassment of having to figure out how to navigate these like micro moments that exist. Our goal is to help one create a space of like you can talk about it here. This is your space, right? This is the time to talk about it. And two, to help them process what it means to be embarrassed and ashamed, right? Like, how do we create opportunities for individuals to start working through what they probably held on for years? And so, shame is a huge underlying tone to all of these kind of layers that we have to navigate. Um, so, part of our job, one of the best interventions that I've learned is like normalizing, right? So we want to try and be helpful when loved ones are hurting themselves. Right? Like for families, I think there's these narratives of like you shouldn't be doing all these things, but you find yourself still like letting them in your house or like still giving them money or like, you know, still staying with them if it's your partner that keeps drinking every week, and isn't able to be a father right now. We want to protect people we love from consequences of their behavior. Of course we do. Right? Like, I think one of the things that is hard for me to reconcile in my brain is some of the messages we have talked about in the world of family treatment as a whole is like create really firm boundaries and step away. And it's like, but I love that person. Or I loved that person and I loved them for who they were when we met for the first 10 years, but they've changed a lot and I don't know how to love this person. Right. But I'm still holding on to the love I felt for them. And to not be talking about the place of love that people are coming from means that you are not having the full conversation, right? Motivational interviewing, we have to talk about both sides of our own ambivalence before we can properly move through it. And MI would say that we are not, moving through ambivalence if I'm not able to take that next step that's healthy for me. Um, we also might be anxious and distrustful of others, right? When we feel stigmatized. Like, I might start to step away from my community or people I love or talk to or other family members because I feel discriminated against for the scenario that I found myself in, right? For being in a relationship. I know I was working with a family who, um, it was a couple, and one individual was drinking, the other one wasn't, and she was not in a space to divorce him and didn't want to, right? But all of her friends and family were like, "You need to leave this guy." And there was lots of reasons she was staying into this relationship, right? And she started to feel like she couldn't talk to her family or her friends anymore, her other parent friends, um, because they would get frustrated with her because they couldn't understand why she was still in the relationship with this individual who was drinking. Um, and so, it's important for us to like normalize the experience of individuals that are going through this dynamic. Um, so, y'all, I'm a nerd for theory. I highly recommend during this part ask questions. Like, I have a few slides that are overviews on theory. The more time we can spend in a theoretical space, the better opportunity we have to understand the why. So please ask questions, right? I love this little slide, like my plan is for my plan to work, but you know what they say about best laid plans, right? Uh, and I love that because I don't know if you've ever had, like, you're working with families and you start to feel a little lost and you're like, oh, well, we tried this intervention, we did this, and I thought I was doing this. And if you're feeling lost working with somebody, theory should be your backbone to always guide you in where you're going next. If we're not rooted in theory, it's very easy to get lost as a helper. So, my encouragement to all of us is to spend some time in theory. It's not the most exciting. I have some very dense books about theory, but you know what? They come really helpful when we just finished our sixth session and somebody's saying, I'm not really making any change. And I can think, well, maybe my theoretical approach is wrong. And I can switch it up so that I can, maybe offer a different set of tools and a different understanding of this person's challenges to them. Um, so I'm going to talk about three theories. We're going to talk about attachment-based family therapy. We're going to talk about emotionally focused couples therapy, and then craft. Again, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty just yet of like how to use these things. We're going to talk about these things more as just at a theoretical level. Okay, attachment theory. Can I ask how many individuals here are familiar with attachment theory? You can just add in the chat, thumbs up. We have like little emojis there. Seeing if anybody posted anything. Yeah, a little bit. See Jackie and Jennifer, some familiarity. Attachment theory goes deep, right? Like we start with uh Mary Ainsworth. I did thesis. Oh, Robin. Robin, you should come up here. I'll welcome you to the stage. Um, so attachment is at the core of so much of what we do and how we interact with the world. And so, attachment theory for us, it really explains how early relationships shape emotional regulation, trust, and coping skills. Um, we're going to talk a little bit about unmet attachment needs, right? Specifically from emotionally focused therapy. But, in families, disrupted attachment patterns can increase vulnerability to substance use. But what I really want to focus on is like we can also repair the attachment bonds, right? Like in attachment theory, we have learned time and time again that ruptures are actually can be somewhat normal in attachment. Um, Big asterisk there, but repairs are just as possible. I'm gonna look at the chat. Uh, do. Nice. Yeah. See lots of people. Oh, and hi, Corey. Hi, Kim. Very cool. One thing I just like really want to make sure that we understand is like when we're talking about repairing relationships, we're talking about repairing the attachment bonds between family, which really is the key of promoting healing. So to focus on using EFT, EFT is such a beautiful theory. I highly recommend Sue Johnson's work. She's got a few books. I know there's one that's really great, kind of externally for non-clinicians. I think it's called Into the Storm. And then there's two kind of main books that are like really if you want to geek out on attachment theory and EFT specifically. I'm blanking right now, but I can send them after if anybody's interested. But EFT really focuses on this kind of model where the first thing we're doing is we're de-escalating negative cycles of interaction, right? Like we find ourselves kind of because of a rupture stuck in this pattern of negative interaction, and so we want to start to change the positions. And then she calls it consolidation and integration, right? So we start to change the positions, we start learning, we iterate, and eventually we kind of reland. The language I use is like you have a negative cycle, and then we're working towards creating this kind of positive cycle of interaction with one another. Um, and how we do this, and really the starting place. Um, oh no, where'd my chart go? Guys, I'm so sad. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Okay, I'm going off script. Bear with me for a minute. This guy. I love this little chart. I know it's a little janky, but here we are. Um, Ashley, can you confirm, is it showing the cycle?
Yes, it is.
Nice. Cool. Okay. So when we start with emotionally focused couples therapy, we are really trying to work with individuals to track their cycle. And this is the negative interactional cycle. And the more we can trace this, the better that couples will get at being able to identify the cycle. That is like the whole first part. And so we're going to start at behaviors, right? If my partner comes to me and, kind of angrily puts her phone down and says, I'm just over this, right? That'd be a lot with no context, right? But what am I seeing? I'm seeing tone. I'm hearing words. I'm sensing, slamming the phone down like something is wrong. It's going to start if I'm in a negative interactional cycle with like, oh, once again, I feel unsafe in my relationship. I feel not valued. I feel like my partner doesn't want to connect with me. Maybe it's that I'm feeling really isolated, right? So we start with unmet attachment needs. It is the message of, am I connected and close in this relationship with my adult partner or not right now? And it's going to generate an emotion, right? That emotion will sit on top and say, like, do I feel um uh do I feel valued? I feel isolated, I feel alone, I feel unheard, I feel uncared for, right? Is kind of the primary emotion. So we have this line that goes across. We consider I was always taught this line is the iceberg. Everything below the line is below the iceberg. Everything above the line is above the iceberg, meaning as a person, what do I see day to day? We suck at talking about primary emotions. We're terrible at it. I don't go into a conversation and say, I just want you to know that I feel really unheard in our relationship, right? And that makes me feel really distant from you and that we're not able to, connect as a unit. What I do say is, why do you slam your phone down and talk to me like that? That really pisses me off, right? And so what am I actually saying? I'm sharing my secondary emotions, right? My perception is what's happening in my mind. What am I thinking about when I think about my relationship? Am I thinking that they care and love about me? Am I thinking that my relationship sucks? Am I thinking about I feel like this always happens all the time? So I really perception is about the cognitive process. So we start at this attachment need, we start to then learn more about the emotions and how those emotions influence my cognition. And then all of that is going to manifest in a behavior. What if we flip the script, right? What if my partner came home and she said, "Hey, it's just been like a really long day and I'm really tired. It'd be like really nice to just order something out and sit together on the couch and scroll on our phones," right? What's the behavior? I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad you shared that with me. Thank you," right? That makes total sense. I'm able to receive that. The perception that I might have is going to be like, I'm really glad my partner can share like where they're at with me at any given time. So we want to move couples from this really negative interactional cycle, which if you bring this chart up with them, they're going to tell you like that. Here's my whole cycle right there. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm going to tell you my partner's cycle as well while we're at it. And you have to stop them. But this is like the foundation of the negative cycle that we often see couples in. Uh, our job is to help trace that cycle and move them through. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I love Sue Johnson's quotes. I have quotes here from like everybody. From the cradle to the grave, humans desire a certain someone who will look out for them, notice and value them, soothe their wounds, reassure them in life's difficult places, and hold them in the dark. This is one of the books, The Practice of Emotionally Focused Couples Therapy. Can we talk about how different this is, or how, in contrast to somebody who is alone? Yeah, I was just working with somebody who left corrections. They didn't even set up their Medicaid or their Suboxone properly. Somebody picked them up with a tent and a cell phone and drove them to a safe spot for them to sleep out at night. Are we soothing their wounds or reassuring them in life's dark place, difficult places, or holding them in the dark? Are we valuing them? No, we're not doing any of these things. This individual was alone and was continued to be alone post their incarceration, right? EFT attempts to change the narrative of we work on repairing relationships so we can provide this experience. We just want to know someone's looking out for us, right? That's all we want. It doesn't mean you have to live in this house while you're high. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I want you to know at a fundamental level I care about you. And that might mean that, like, we're going to go get some lunch together. Or that might mean, I want to drop off some food, or I'll even go get you Starbucks because I love you. And like, I'm here to talk with you when it makes sense. And so we'll come back to this, but I love EFT. And while we're talking about just couples, it's really powerful to think about as attachment theory. I add this word in here. I think language is so important, right? So the one thing that I want to share is like my biggest thing is to get people that are in a space of um, uh, armor and hardness to becoming soft. I worked with this family for a long time. It was two family members, parents who were divorced, and their 18-year-old son. And their 18-year-old son loved smoking weed, right? Like it was his whole world. He didn't care about Fortnite. He didn't care about going to school. He didn't care about hanging out with friends. He cared about smoking ganja, and he loved it. And his parents hated it, right? So they come see me, and the parents said, Jack, we need you to help him realize how bad smoking weed is. And I was like, y'all are in for a rough awakening because that's not what we do here. So I said, I want everybody to just share about what's going on with them, and everybody gets 10 minutes. And if it's your turn, you don't want to talk anymore, then we're going to sit here in silence because everybody has equal footing here. And at first, the first few sessions, the 18-year-old didn't say much. He just kind of like sat there, and we sat there because he had equal say in the family dynamic, right? His voice was really small when we started. After the third session, though, he came in and he said, You know what? I'm super pissed that all my parents want to do is talk about ganja. Like, I want to talk about other things that I care about. And like, I don't even feel like we can even have a conversation at this point. So I was kind of like, tell me like what's on your mind and what's coming up for you. And throughout our sessions, all I was trying to do was get the parents to just listen to their kid. And we no longer were allowed to talk about marijuana. And I only wanted them to ask questions about his life. And he would get annoyed plenty. But over six or so sessions, everyone in that family came in from, you need to stop smoking. I don't want to talk to you, to we built a routine of, hey, I want to hear about what's going on with you. You were talking about your interest in baseball last time. Can you share more about that? Right. And the whole body language is different. My biggest first goal, and through attachment, I see attachment happening when people are softer. And when both or multiple people are softer, change can start to happen. All right, where am I in time? All right, I gotta move, guys. Attachment-based family therapy. So we talked about EFT that's really focused on couples and that negative interactional cycle that we find ourselves in. Attachment-based family therapy, it was developed by Guy Diamond and Suzanne Levy. Wild story. I'm working with Guy Diamond's son years later now. Crazy coincidence. And he joined one of our Zoom meetings because he realized it was therapist. It was awesome. It was like, dude, you're like a legend, and I get to meet you. And if you ever look at a picture of Guy Diamond, he's always wearing a fedora, and he was wearing a fedora when we met. So sorry, that story's more for me than anybody else. But uh, attachment-based family therapy is really focused. This is where we get our language of rupture and repair. Uh, Attachment-based family therapy is focused on repairing the parent to child bonds to restore trust, improve communication, and reduce. It says adolescent distress. It is a younger approach, but I still use it all the time. Um, the idea here is like this is an attachment first modality that we're focused on emotional connection and well-being, right? So the repair, and this is where we see repairs, we look at past hurts and we rebuild trust so that I can talk about past hurts. Almost every couple that comes to me will say, like, I'm feeling really stuck right now in my relationship. And I say, what are we what are our conversations look like? Like, how do you know you're stuck right now? And they will always say, well, because we always fight about the same two or three things. And to me, those two or three things are our past hurts, right? And if you start to learn those narratives, it always be like, well, 6 years ago, this event happened, and I learned something about my relationship. One of them is I had a partner call the cops on her husband, right, for drinking and being really unruly. She was right to do that, but then the narrative came back of like, oh, my partner's not willing to work with me through hard things, right? Another case was this guy I was working with ended up taking his wife, who was engaging in self-harming behaviors, to the hospital, um, and left for a little while after he was there for like 2 days, and wasn't there when she woke up, right? And it was totally accidental. It was not an intentional thing. He went to like go get food. I don't even remember. This was some time ago. But the message was that I'm alone. Right? And like, how could you? Like, I was in this very vulnerable space, and you're the person that's supposed to be here, and you weren't there. Right? But then we're years later, and we're talking about the yard wasn't properly mowed. And we're talking about that for days, right? And like, are we really talking about the yard? Are we talking about how we experience one another and the perception of our relationship? And it's emotion driven, right? It's supposed to foster openness, empathy, and we're validating one another. Attachment-based family therapy moves through five key tasks. We start as helpers. This is the adolescent alliance, right? So, if we're staying true to attachment-based family therapy, you meet with the adolescents for a couple sessions, then you have them stay home and you meet with the parents for a couple sessions. So you as a clinician are like really building and fostering connection. And what you do during that time is you try to understand the hurt that happened, right? So sessions like one and kind of two, you're like just building rapport and getting to know more about them. Sessions two and three with each of them, you're trying to understand one thing at a time, a past hurt that happened and how it happened. With parents, you're also doing a lot of coaching, and you're really helping scaffolding how they receive information, right? And like, how do we listen to understand, not listen to respond, not listen to solve, but just to hear? And then this is so beautiful. You bring them in for a session and you have an attachment task where you ask them to talk about it, right? And you facilitate this like attachment repair. And then there's a little bit of a feedback loop where you kind of do this a few times, depending on how many things are in there. And then we promote autonomy, which we're going to talk about in a later slide. And then at the end, we have this kind of relational reframing around like, so what does it mean now that like we do have a supportive, safe environment to talk about things? Um, I'm curious just in the chat, like how many people have heard of attachment-based family therapy and or maybe have used it at all? I'm not sure how familiar it is with individuals. I know it takes a second to get to the keyboard. Um, while I wait on that, I will just read out this quote from Guy Diamond. The family is the secure base for child development. It is the schoolroom of life where kids learn about themselves, learn how to trust people, and learn how to manage their emotions better. Um, like that's what we're here. Still a grad student and have, oh, that's awesome, Jennifer. Yeah, Melissa, everyone's familiar except for Peak, right? Yes. Cool. Y'all, I highly recommend attachment-based family therapy. And if we conceptualize this through the lens of substance use disorders, right? We have these huge ruptures that happen. And so the first thing we do is we love on the person with substance use disorders, right? Like we go and just start to, instead of the adolescent alliance, it's the loved one alliance, right? Is we're giving the space for individual to just talk about what's going on with them. And you're going to learn so much. I'm not giving you money here, but I'm going to care about you. I'm going to love on you, which is probably a new experience for a few hours. And then I'm going to meet with the parents and I'm going to give them craft skills, which we're going into next. And then we're going to come together and we're going to talk about the hard things, right? We're going to talk about why this relationship's been challenging. And then we're going to build up autonomy for individuals. So I think it's a really, really powerful approach. and it's pretty new too. Okay, so craft, love craft. It's like the bedrock of how we conceptualize families and substance use disorders. So community reinforcement and family training, or craft, is an approach for families who have a loved one struggling with substances, but is not really interested in making changes or getting help, right? So this is like that sometimes pre-contemplative, even sometimes contemplative stage, right? Maybe you heard like one night when they're a little high, it's like, I'm kind of ready to go to treatment. They wake up the next day, they're like, no, fuck that. I'm not going to treatment. Craft is really good at helping move people through stages of change, right? And like, really, the goal is to get them into treatment and have them stay in treatment. And I think one of the things that people come to me all the time, they want change and they want it right now. And what I share is, do you want change that's going to last for a day, or do you want change that's going to last for a lifetime? Because that will totally depend on the approach that we use. And if you just need to get somebody into treatment today, which sometimes that is the right thing, there's nothing wrong. It's all case by case basis. There's different approaches that are really good at just getting somebody into treatment today. You might be having to navigate them and what they're doing in 3 days from now, but at least they're safe tonight. And maybe that's the most important thing. Okay. I would say at this point, the threshold for somebody just needs help right now is very high. Most of the time, people want change, but we have to do it on other people's timeline, right? Change can always happen. It's just not on your own timeline. And so, craft is about a process of change, not creating change today. It's about understanding how to communicate positively, using positive reinforcement to focus on what is working, and then taking real steps and awareness of how to take care of yourself, right? Self-care 101. Um, so this is from Dr. Myers, right? The craft intervention method was developed with the belief that since family members can and do make important contributions in other areas of addiction treatment, that the CSO can play a powerful role in helping to engage the substance user who's in denial to submit to treatment. Just to pause for a minute, how many family members are usually around when somebody is going to treatment for the first day? Usually there's somebody. It is very rare for me to see somebody show up solo with no support, no financial support, no emotional support. Usually there's somebody that's around, right? Craft is saying, that's interesting. How can we actually like work with that person to make treatment as a whole a better experience? In addition, it is often the substance user who reports that the family pressure or influence is the reason they sought treatment. Also, CSOs who attend the craft program also benefit by becoming more independent and reducing, a variety of other psychopathology, even if their loved one does not enter treatment. Uh, I love this. It also really speaks to like, I always share with families, you can't control anybody. Like by the time they're like 14 years old, you've lost 98% of your control over them and their behaviors, but we can always influence people. Craft is about developing the skills of influencing rather than trying to control. And then just a few kind of high level things, and we'll take a break. Working with families in substance use disorders, helping helpers develop a process, not a set of answers, right? So, like, what we are doing is helping support, like, what is the process you have of loving on your loved one, taking care of yourself, um, repairing attachment bonds, right? But I'm not going to tell you how to do it. And I think that's a big change. A lot of families come and say, like, so what do I do? And the answer is like, I don't know what you do, but I can give you a lot of, I use the language of guidepost, and I'm going to give you a ton of tools. And then with that, hopefully that you can show up better to the process. Because I don't know what your loved one's going to do, right? I have no idea what their timeline is. I share this a lot too. There's a great study from the Gottmans that talked about perpetual problems in relationships, and perpetual problems make up about 70. Don't quote me. Somebody in the chat might know. But the vast majority of problems we have in relationships never get fixed, right? So, what does that mean for us? That means that we shouldn't be figuring out how to really fix problems, or solve problems in relationships. We should get much better at talking about and engaging in the process of problems. Uh, so that is our goal, right? We help helpers develop a process, not a set of answers. The processes include understanding behavior and motivation, developing self-awareness, understanding and practicing communication, and creating conditions for a long-term positive change. The last one, honestly, we don't care about the other three. Our goal is to create conditions for long-term change. The moment I care about is when somebody looks at somebody else and says, "I'm struggling and I'm leaning on you for help because of the relationship that we share. Because I'm no longer so rooted in resentment or I'm so distant from you, I know that I can lean on you." We create conditions for long-term positive change, right? That's the magical stuff right there. Think there's one more here. Let's see. Yeah. So we learned that our relationship gives us influence to support change. Talked about a little bit. Um, Goals of supporting families as ourselves, right? Like we learn about our own boundaries, and we also learn about how to like give self-compassion. And we also learn how to love differently. And that last part is the part that I really focus on. Is like for a long time all of us grew up with a template thanks to our parents and or the people around us in those 0 to 14 years about like what it means to love somebody, right? 0 to 2 we learned a shit ton, and then we learned a lot more around 2 to 14 years old. And so that's the template that I'm bringing you today. And you, for whatever reasons, have decided to engage in opioid use and benzo use and stimulant use because that's how you figured out how to show up to the insanity of the world that's in front of us. And so the goal or the pattern of how I love you currently needs to change. I'm not telling you to not love somebody. I'm not telling you to disconnect from somebody. I'm working with you to figure out how to love somebody totally different than the way you are now. And that's going to be day to day how I love you. That's going to be maybe internally how I love you, right? We have to just learn. We have to rewire how I show up and love you. And that's our goal, right? That is our largest goal as clinicians. Okay, I talked a lot. It's 10:56. Let's take a 5-minute stretch break. We're going to come back at 12:01. No, sorry, 11:01. I almost skipped a whole hour. 11:01. So feel free, grab some water, step away for just a minute. My attention doesn't stay for a full hour. So yeah, we'll come back 11:01. I will see y'all here very soon. Nice. I'm gonna get us started and I'll just add back in the chat. Um, nice. Y'all, I work remote and like lots of people have the walking treadmill things that people are just on now, right? And like, well, just all day, like 8 hours, they're just walking while in meetings and stuff. Mind blowing to me. So that might be you right now, and that's awesome. But for me, I'm sitting back down. Let's get started. So for like the next 45 minutes, we're just going to get into tools, right? We talked a lot about theory. We talked a lot about, um, kind of what it means to be helpers, the why behind the what. And so just to kind of recap, we talked about emotionally focused couples therapy. We talked about attachment-based family therapy, and we talked about craft, right? So all these practical tools are going to come directly from one of these modalities. I think the only one that might be in here is motivational interviewing on the very first part. But just so you know, right, theory guides us and helps us conceptualize who the client is, who the family is, what their challenges are, and how we can help. Then it comes down to techniques, right? And so the rest of this is going to be focused on techniques, and hopefully, you might not take all of these, but just as we're trying to help family members add, more tools to their toolkit, you in your role, hopefully you can take away one or two tools in your role. So building motivation, right? I use the quote setting the stage. I use the term setting the stage all the time. Like I'm never gonna say, well, maybe, depending on my client. But I'm not often going to say building, hey, let's build your motivation for change, right? Like clients gonna look at me and be like, what does that mean? Right. But what I might say is like, I want to set the change or I want to set the stage for you to, accomplish the goal we've been talking about. I want to set the stage for you to like be in a position so you can start dating again. So it's the same language, right, or the same concept, but the different language can be much more accessible. Uh, when we're doing all of this work, right? Be like Ted, be curious, not judgmental, right? Are we listening to understand where people are? And this is so true for motivation. Or are we coming to snap judgments? Are we bringing in my own biases, my own kind of background into um, uh somebody else's experience right now, right? Like I stopped drinking and drugging, but the things that were important for me and what helped me may or may not have anything to do what's important to you or what's going to help you, right? So we be curious, not judgmental. um so building motivation, right? The biggest part that we want to do is like starting with families, we explore CSO's previous attempts to stop the loved one's substance use, right? It's like truly being curious. I don't ask it just once and be like, tell me something you did to like help stop, and then we move on. I want to know the whole story. When did you find out about their substance use and what did you do to curb it then? When did substance use increase? I always think in terms of modulation. Like, did you notice any changes or increases in substance use for your loved one? Did you notice any decreases for your loved one? And what was happening? And what did you do about it during those times, right? How did you show up during the decreases? How did you show up during the increase moments? Um, and so then from that, I could tell you if we were to map this right now, we would absolutely have problem areas. And typically what I see is that there's a consistent pattern of like, I tried these three things and I keep trying them over again because I heard that from somebody, or I went to an Al-Anon meeting, or I went to a smart recovery family of friends, and like this was one thing I took away. It's probably sometimes those are really helpful things, right? But it might not be helpful for your situation right now. So our first start is to just like understand. we describe craft's three goals, right? And so we are here to help with positive communication, positive reinforcement, and self-care strategies. And then we mentioned 2 to 3 procedures about how they could apply to the own CSO situation. And so I think, I always think in terms of like self of the therapist is a term. I think Jennifer, you had mentioned like being in grad school currently. Like there's this concept of like self of the therapist. Like, how do you bring yourself and your presence? And I would challenge you to think of like in this role, reminding yourself, and I believe this true agnostic to this is a very craft centered technique, but I believe that the client or the people in the room are always the expert in their life, right? I'm the expert in the techniques and tools that can help people navigate some hard components of their life, and I can help you practice and give you those. But they're the expert. There are different schools of thought. There are different theories that would argue with that. But I'm going to challenge you to think about like, oh, you need the CSO's help. I'm trying to learn from you as a clinician so that I can like best just parachute in with you to support the front lines, right? Um, we also set positive expectations. This is why I'm really intentional. You can steal this, or if you have a better one in the chat or one you like, how do we set positive expectations? But I'm not going to promise you maybe the thing that you want, right? I'm not going to promise you anything because I don't have the crystal ball. I worked with families who have had a loved one die while I was working with them. I worked with families whose loved one just still kind of continues to use substances and didn't make a ton of change. I've used with families that have individuals enter treatment and cycle back through 10 times before they kind of stabilize, right? I've had individuals go to treatment once. I have no idea what's about to happen, but I will say, I know change will happen, but I have no promises on what timeline. And I believe that change is always happening, right? I don't know what timeline. What I can also promise is that if the individuals in the room really do the work and focus on the positive communication tools more so than anything else, they're gonna have a relationship. And I know one of the families I worked with most recently that their son died, their middle son died. They had an awesome relationship with him for like a year. He was out still slinging dope the whole time, right? But they like spent a lot of time with him. Would talk to him on the phone. They started to learn about his life, and sometimes, sometimes it wasn't the best conversation. But sometimes they would get to learn. They learned all about his girlfriend, which they had no communication for like the 2 years leading up, right? They got to learn about this job that he was really excited about. He was a huge Raiders fan, Las Vegas Raiders fan. And so his dad went to a game with him during that year, right? And then he died. And the thing they said to me that really stood out is they were so grateful they had that year of connection with him because they would have been so much more devastated if they had continued that pattern of disconnection, right? I worked with families who have set the firmest boundaries, and I've worked with the families that have practiced craft the whole time and have had the same outcomes, right? Both good, middle, and devastating. So our goal is to set positive expectations with families. I'm curious for any of you that have worked with families, or maybe even just individuals, like how do you set positive expectations? Like what are you saying to them? We'll see. I'll leave that out there. Uh, and I'll just say it again and I'll move on is how do you set expectations with clients or families that start to come in the door? So if you have an answer, add it into the chat. Um, so motivation, right? As a counselor, we stay client focused, right? We constantly are praising the individuals in the room and like all that they have been doing to get them here. We're trying to validate the approach of like what it means to be connected with people. And we try to find a balance between allowing the client to vent and moving the CSO forward to address the problem. This takes practice. One of the tools that I have found, and there's a variation of them. Um, Sometimes I'll say like, hey, if the family's new or like doesn't really know it's happening, sometimes I'll say like, I just want to be mindful of time and kind of shift us to focusing on some tools that we can use in the meantime. Sometimes if somebody does this a lot, I'll be a little bit more direct in a reflection with them. It's just like I do want to just offer you a reflection that we spend a lot of time venting or describing, the challenges that we've talked about already. Is this a helpful tool for you or not? Right? That can be pretty hard for people to hear, but we're simply doing our job as counselors and reflecting a process to somebody. Um, uh, and then, understanding, um, part of our goal is understanding like reinforcers that are existing and like listening, and we'll get into reinforcers in a second. Progress, not perfection, rightly. Um, Okay, so building motivation is really about like starting sessions and like how we get the family from that state of like maybe it's despondency, it's not hopeful to like I'm ready for change to happen, right? Um, for me, where I start to think a lot about is like, so how do we change that attachment narrative that's been built? We understand that ruptures happen very often during substance use. So how do we start to like create positive change around attachment narratives? Um, you've watched Ted Lasso, Roy Kent. Why won't you let me be happy? Um, so the biggest thing that I want to focus on with attachment is we talked about in that negative interactional cycle, like the accessing of primary emotions. Um, so our purpose behind this is like we want to move way beyond that anger, that defensiveness. I want to move beyond resentment, right? To underlying feelings can be fear, loneliness, shame, isolation. Um, and so, like, the technique here is kind of simple in theory, but it's like name primary emotions or softer emotions, right? And so people will come to me and be like, well, I don't know how to do that. I'm just pissed off, right? And say, like, okay, I understand being pissed off. And I'll have emotion wheels. Everybody should have an emotion wheel. And if you're ever doing telehealth, this is what I do. Like, quite literally, I'll just go in, I'll say emotion wheel, and if I'm screen sharing, I'll say, "All right, I know you're pissed off, so I hear angry. Pick me another one." They'll say, "Well, I don't know, disgust," right? I'll say, "Okay, that's interesting. Pick me something from sadness." And you'll see the wheels start turning, right? Because now we're trying to, Sue Johnson will talk about modulating people's emotional experience. We either amplify or we try to dampen people's emotional. Sometimes I come to people and they've got every word from sadness to fear, and they're experiencing all of them. They're going to tell you all of it. I need to dampen some of that, right? I need you to focus on a more singular kind of experience so that we can work through it. For other people, I'm looking at my fellow men, tend to just focus on I'm angry. Not helpful at all, Dad. So we work through the process to amplify that emotion. Like, tell me more about that anger and like where it comes from, and maybe we start to soften that emotion by finding a more specific experience. So, accessing primary emotions is about this amplification or dampening to really isolate a primary emotion. I love this example, right? It's when you come home high, I get scared, I'm losing you. Think about how that changes the conversation, right? Versus you never think about this family. Is that going to go well? And I think about our goals in conversation a lot. Is the goal to let somebody know you're pissed off and to create distance? Or is your goal to foster connection? And which of these two examples do that, right? If the goal is to foster example, And if I say, you never think about this family, am I inviting that person to join me or am I pushing them away? Naturally, we're pushing away, right? When you come home, I get scared I'm losing you. All of a sudden, I'm inviting somebody into where I'm at as a person, right? Now, there's a little bit of a caveat with accessing primary emotions. I have to work to get here because that means I got to take off some of my armor and expose part of who I am. And so this is where that attachment-based family therapy really comes to play is we need to be kind of coaching each party about how to receive primary emotions. So one is accessing, the second part is receiving. Um, there's a concept called catching the bullet, where let's say I say like, you come home high, I get scared I'm losing you, and then you say, "Well, I don't give a shit what you're scared about," right? You as a clinician need to jump in there so that that person doesn't get really harmed by that behavior. And you can jump in and just reflect. It sounds like, hey, it sounds like that was a lot to receive in that moment. Can you just maybe pause for a second? And I would love to hear like the emotion that comes up for you when you hear that. Sometimes people are really hard, and they're like not in that soft space to receive. And then it's your job to coach them up a little bit and say, like, I understand for you, there's a lot of history there and there's a lot of context. But I just want to let you know, at least in this moment, like what I'm really hearing is your partner, your mom is really saying, like, I'm really scared of losing you, and it's just a really negative internal experience, and it has really nothing to do with your behavior. Can you maybe hear that? Right? So we're trying to coach people on how we access primary emotions. The ideal is after enough coaching, we get both people where we say, I'm scared I'm losing you. And I offer, and I just say, like, that makes total sense. Maybe I say, like, I'm really scared too. Think about the beautiful connection we have. And to me, this is now becoming a safe place for us. We're building that security and emotional connection with one another. Um, oh, this is where I put my chart. What was I doing, guys? Okay. So going back to this chart, unmet attachment needs are at the bottom. Sometimes this is a really hard concept. I don't tend to, unless I'm doing specific trainings, talk about attachment needs. But it's pretty easy to start to hear attachment needs. And so this is a great, I forget where this comes from, but this is a great kind of mapping of you can listen to what people are saying and like what attachment style this is coming from. We didn't cover attachment style super well. There's a million articles out there though. And so if I'm hearing somebody saying like giving a lot of validation is really like consistent and showing up, if I hear somebody say like, yeah, my mom's really been there for me throughout this whole time of me drinking every day, which I have a client saying that, right? His words to me are, "My parents are a rock right now," right? I'm hearing secure attachment. I'm not hearing anxious, avoidant, disorganized. But what if I hear like, well, if I call my parents, I don't know if they'll actually show up or do anything. Right? Now I'm starting to think anxious or avoidant and more curious about learning more, right? Anxious is about unpredictability or inconsistency. Avoidant is about like consistent distance between the two. Um, I have another client who, not substance use related, but has basically had no connection with his parents in a meaningful way. And it wasn't until he started forming connections with his in-laws that he started to learn what it meant to have like a secure attachment with a parent figure. He had one with a coach, which helped kind of course correct earlier on in his life, but has a really strong avoidant that comes out in a lot of different ways, right? This overemphasis on independence was a really strong narrative in his family. Um, Disorganized is its own bucket of chaos, so I don't wanna spend too much time in there. Um, but typically, we see this a lot more with very significant traumatic events that happen early on, and can be hard to kind of resolve later on in life, but all possible, right? And it's about changing the narrative from one of these other three into this like very consistent narrative around relationships. Um, yeah, and if you have any questions, I know that's all of this sometimes can be a lot to take in and it can bring up a lot. So like feel free to ask any questions. Um, the last one we talked about this specifically from attachment-based family therapy, but it's around autonomy promoting interventions, right? So we're trying to encourage both connection and independence. And Bowen family therapy, which is kind of its own treatment, uses the word differentiation of self. And the concept there is like, how well am I like, can I be with you and can I be without you? And I really like that language, right? Like, and how am I in both of those spots? Like, am I okay when I'm with you? And that could be your family, that you could be a relationship, a couples dynamic, um, and not or, and am I okay being by myself, right? Autonomy promoting interventions are um, both fostering connection and supporting independence, right? And so, like, you know, one thing that we might do is uh let's say we have a loved one that's like kind of ready to go to treatment. We could pick the treatment program. That's not a bad thing. In true autonomy promoting interventions, though, we actually might ask the client to either explore their own treatment. Usually, what I suggest, though, is pick two or three options. Because I don't know what it means to be that individual, right? I don't know. And you know what? As a parent to your adult child, you have no idea all the things they're thinking about, and the things you're thinking about are probably not the things they care about. They just probably don't. So, the thing I always try and do is your job as a parent or as a loved one, do the homework. What's going to work? Get ready because we know motivation's short. So, spend time, find 2, 3 treatment programs, know how long the drive is, how long they could stay for, what the finances are. Get it all done because that part takes a long time. And then put it down in a Google Doc, or, or just write it down somewhere. And then when your loved one is ready, I've looked at some options. Would you like me to share them with you or not? Right? We don't just assume everything. We encourage helping um, uh, CSOs to like really be in a position to working with their loved one and not doing it for them. Again, long-term outcomes. If you want them to go to treatment today, oh no, why did my screen sharing stop? I don't know what happened there. Hold on, let me reset it. Ashley, what's going on today? I'm having tech issues.
It is Jag versus Zoom today, clearly.
Eh, all right, I think we're back though. Is it showing?
Yeah, it's just not in
Yep.
full screen.
Okay, cool. There we go. All right, thank you, Ashley. I'm fighting with Zoom. Um, so I just to kind of wrap this part up, I really encourage bringing people into the process and not deciding everything. We want to respect autonomy. There's a lot of theory that the more autonomy people feel, the healthier decisions that they make, which is a mind-blowing concept. But in motivational interviewing, we see that when somebody feels that some sides of choice have been taken away, that then we start to default towards maybe more unhealthy behaviors. But when really feel like I'm in the driver's seat of my life and I understand all the cost benefits, that I'll make the healthiest decision out of all the options in front of me. Um, so functional analysis. This is done in a lot of different treatment approaches. I think, somebody correct me, but like dialectical, I know dialectical behavioral therapy does it. Um, we do it in craft. There's a few others. Somebody in the chat could correct me. But the idea here is that we want behaviors to make sense, right? And I love this slide from Ted Lasso. It's like, I'm not sure how you realize how psychologically healthy that is. I share all the time. If you like sit down and meet with somebody for a little bit and you understand what it means to be them, and you understand how we got to where we are, even if that is you're slamming dope every single day, it always makes sense to me, right? Like, once I hear the full story, even if we're talking about depression or bipolar symptoms, or it's like, oh, of course. Like, now I get it. Uh, we want to foster that experience for family members with their loved ones. Um, and so a functional analysis is to really understand how are behaviors occurring and how are they being reinforced or not reinforced, right? This is like true behaviorism, but we want to take a moment to understand, like, what's the actual behavior and how is it being, reinforced within its context or not? And to kind of help us understand as loved ones or as CSOs how we can show up to this process. Because sometimes we might be inadvertently reinforcing, or sometimes inadvertently not reinforcing when we should be, and vice versa. So, a functional analysis is a tool to analyze the function of a behavior so that we can influence the behavior by either decreasing or increasing it. Um, yeah, and I think learned this from the people at CMC, but like the term roadmap can be used if preferred, right? Like roadmap of behavior. Sometimes if we use the words functional analysis, another simple way is just like, hey, let's take today's session and like let's just really understand the behavior of using weed after school right now, right? Like that's all we're gonna do today. So typically with a function analysis, you'll have this template before, during, after, right? So I'm going to ask a parent, uh, gather all the information about the IP's triggers, both external and internal, to the best of our ability, right? We're probably still missing some 80% of data, but take time. Like, what do you know was happening before that behavior? What was happening externally, right? Was there context? What was there, uh, thing that they were invited to or not invited to? Was there sports happening? I don't know what's going on, right? But external and internal, like, how were they feeling that day when you talked to them? What was their mood? What was their affect for what you know? And then post behavior, smoking weed during, right after school, what are the positive benefits and negative? And we have to really challenge people here because they don't want to look at the positives of substance use. And that is the most important thing we can be doing here is I want to understand all of the reasons why you are using weed after school, right? Like that's what I'm most curious about. And the other one, and this when I worked on a helpline for a while, this one would blow people's minds. Your negatives are not their negatives. Your negatives might be health issues, might be, we're using opioids, fear of mortality and death. Um, if they're young and like just starting to smoke weed, like, is this going to start them down a bad path, right? That's what you are caring about. If it's your partner, it might be that you're spending our money, right? To them, I care about their negatives. Right, so it's through the lens of their world. It says the lens of the CSO. That's wrong. That's my mistake. Should be through the lens of the loved one. Um, so you're sitting there and like trying to get all this information to understand for both you as a counselor and for them how we can help create a plan to decrease the uh the use. So just like an example, checking time. So before I've been feeling stressed out from school, and my friends reached out to me asking to come hang out. So daring, I'm hanging out with my friends, and they're like, "Oh, Jack, like we should really drink some. Like that would be fun." And I'm kind of sitting here, it's like I know I probably shouldn't drink, and like feel a little anxious about it. Um, but also I really want to fit in and like these guys are pretty cool and I'm not really feeling comfortable saying no because I don't think they're gonna like me and I'm feeling pretty alone in my day. Okay, so screw it, I'm gonna drink. So I drank 4 drinks feeling pretty, buzzed. And I was able to relax and I had fun and forgot about the stress. That's the daring. And so I wake up tomorrow, and maybe I felt a little sad and shameful. Um, maybe, I felt like I couldn't tell anybody because I'm pretty young, I'm 14 years old and just hanging out with these older guys and I don't really know how to tell my parents. I'm a little anxious, like, do they even know? Right. So I'm experiencing all of these consequences after the behavior, not before. Parents or people that are not using substances experience the consequences before substance use has ever happened, which is its own fun rabbit hole. Here's another example, though, right? Is that before, so different scenario, right? Or same scenario, but the behavior is different. The individual decides to not drink, right? So I'm feeling stressed out from school. My friends ask me to come hang out. Same before. Daring, though, my behavior is like, felt like going out might motivate me to drink, and that's not what I'm trying to do right now. So I played video games all night. Most of my friends were at the party, though, so I didn't have anyone to play with. So I'm just kind of playing video games by myself. So I felt kind of sad and lonely, right? After woke up next morning, went to the gym, felt proud of myself for not drinking, was able to focus on school later that day, right? So, like, you can see the benefits or the consequences are really happening both during and after. During in the first scenario, I was able to chill and have fun, but I experienced consequences later. The benefits of not drinking, in this case, happened after the behavior, right? So how do we reinforce? And now we're starting to learn where the benefits and consequences exist for the family that we're working with, and we can get really strategic about that. Um, so I love functional analysis. I feel like that they're very illuminating. One that I will share that's very common for my people that are stopping substance use that are parents is that first time on a weekend day, like a Sunday or a Saturday, that they wake up and they're clear-headed and their kid comes up and is like excited to hang out with them that day and they're like able to show up and be engaged. I've seen many people break down and having that experience, right? Like a true emotional experience of like, I can't believe that I've been like withholding myself from this moment for so long. And so don't lose sight of those benefits. The last one I'll share, and then we'll go to positive communication, and I think we'll be close to time, is we see a lot of times we might inadvertently withhold behaviors. Okay, so I know now that my partner is working really hard to not drink on the weekends, and they didn't drink on Friday night. So, when's the time to really reinforce that behavior? Well, there's two different ways, right? Now I know that it makes them feel pretty lonely, or yeah, isolated on the night that they normally drink. So maybe I go and make that night more fun, right? I don't really have a whole lot of money to spend, but like maybe I go and like we go and do something we wouldn't normally have done. Go out to the movies and see something that I don't really want to watch, but I know that they want to, right? So it's now diminishing some of the cost. And then in the morning, I really make it intentional around like showing up and being excited that they're more present and engaged and like, hell yeah, go to the gym and like afterwards, let's go get some food, right? So like we can start to show up really differently once we've learned all of this. Um, so I'm going to switch to positive communication. There is so much that has been done around positive communication. What I always tell parents or couples that positive communication is not happy communication. That is not what we're saying here. Positive communication is that we are in a space where we can share things and be vulnerable with one another, and we're emotionally regulated during it, right? That conversations feel productive and they feel thoughtful and fruitful, not I'm going to walk away super happy. I would much rather you have the conversation of saying, I feel like we've been fighting a lot and I really miss you. and I want to spend more time with you, but that feels really hard to do right now. I'm not going to feel good about that. But what wonderful positive communication that is. Um, so I'll move forward. Communication skills, CSOs are more likely to get what they want with positive communication. I think about this all the time. If I had a negative after negative conversation with somebody, if I had a bad conversation with my wife 5 times in a row about something, am I even going to bring it up again? Right? Like, am I even going to talk about it? And how excited am I going to be when that same conversation comes up? Not very excited. But coach up how to promote a lot of excitement around conversations, right? And so when we start having more positive conversation, we start to see that conversation start to lead to better outcomes in general. Positive communication is contagious. So, like if I start going back to our EFT model, I was not going to pull it up, but if I start responding really positively to my partner, it's going to change that loop inherently and start to create a whole new dynamic between me and my child, or me and my partner, or me or my sibling, right? If I kind of just flip the narrative and say, for a week, I'm only going to have positive communication with my loved one, it's going to be contagious for both people. An example I'll give is that I was working with um, a father and son. No, mother and son dynamic. The father was not present at all, and they kept fighting every time. Mostly around he would make requests for money and was smoking weed, kind of related, kind of not. Um, and it was all they would talk about. So I set a ground rule that twice a week, on I think it was Monday and Wednesdays, they were allowed to talk, but they weren't allowed to for the next 2 weeks when they would like connect, talk at all about weed or money. And you could talk about anything else. And it didn't work perfectly at first, so then we learned more about it. And there were some other kind of grenade conversations. So then I like repurposed it to be green light conversations. So I said, what are like the topics that we are aligned on that are like generally positive for you both? And then for 2 weeks, we were only allowed to have conversations that were green light. And they had, within a couple of weeks, radically better conversations, right? They were just talking about life and things that they laughed about, and they were making a lot of fun of their, dad, but they were joined, right? They were like finally had something to like talk about, and it took them some practice. So the more we do this, the more it becomes kind of infectious for all of us. Um, and it teaches us new ways to interact with one another, right? For a long time, we're using that same template. We give them a new template. And lastly, positive reinforcement is critical to craft. And so positive communication is that foundation, right? The thing that I hear a lot of is somebody starting to make change. I've stopped smoking weed and it's been 16, 20 days. And then my dad came to me and he was like, well, why don't you have a job yet? You need to get your act together, XYZ. And in my mind, I've been working so hard to just stop smoking weed. And now I'm feeling actually really demotivated to continue that behavior. So, we want to think about like our language and our communication is really a critical tool for a positive reinforcement as well. Um, a couple things, if you don't take anything away from this positive communication part, is like be brief, be positive, specific and clear, label feelings, offer understanding statements, and accept partial responsibility, right? Like these are your guidelines. So a lot of people, unfortunately, like me right now, are talk a ton, right? And it's not a good way to like receive a lot of information. The best thing that we can do in positive communication is be really brief, frame things in the positive, and being specific and clear, right? And all that might be is like, hey, I really enjoyed spending time with you last week. I would love to do that again. And then shut up. Just stop talking, right? I'll hear family members squeeze 50 concepts into a single thing and they've been talking for 30 minutes and like everybody is bored, tuned out. and I don't really know what I'm supposed to be responding to. And it could have been the most positive conversation and elements, but people get lost. Be brief, be specific, be clear, and be positive, right? You can add in these other like bullet points are really about more coaching around like how to be more engaging, right? Like saying like I feel first is like one of those kind of initial softening things. For understanding statements. It just helping coach parents saying like that makes total sense to me, right? Here's one. Your 23-year-old son, decided to has been really struggling after a breakup of the relationship, quit his job, and has been drinking pretty heavily for the past week and tells you your internal reaction might be to panic. I would love for to hear the first statement should be like, you've been going through a lot. That makes total sense to me, that you would be here right now, right? Think about the difference, and then from there, we can start to figure out game plans if that's necessary or where to go, but we're starting it from a place of, like, "I hear you." We're starting it from a place of positive communication, right? It will increase the likelihood they'll share something similar with you down the road. Um, I'm not gonna go into ors right now because 'cause we're running up against time, but I do love this little, like, progression, right? So practice, practice, practice. Any type of all of these techniques are about practice. You are not going to get good at playing a musical instrument for playing it for one time. You're not going to get good, I've been learning, playing it 100 times for 100 hours. But what we want to do is say, like, we're going to change the way that you're communicating, but I want you to practice now. Let me see if I have, yeah, okay. So, uh, first attempt, that's it. I can't take it anymore. Get help or get out, right? So then they're coming to us and we're like doing some communication drinking. Your drinking is stressing me out. I know your job is extra tough these days, but you have to do better. All right, so second attempt. We're getting there. I'm starting to hear the like your behavior, my impact kind of language. But then we end up this like, but you have to do better, right? Third attempt, I feel when you come home and have been drinking, I miss talking with you. So now I'm really focused on this really soft emotion. I know work is tough. How about I help you figure out another way to handle the stress? I have some ideas. Attempt number 3 to me feels like a repair attempt, right? I don't know how they're gonna respond depending on their coaching and state of mind and their context, but third attempt is a much better attempt. And, like, let's work together as a unit rather than you need to change. So how do we do these attempts? You do them in session. You practice. If you're not going to take any techniques, please take away you have to do role plays because they are not going to be incentivized to do this without a little bit of coaching. I've done this long enough, and people will leave with you can hand them the worksheets, you can hand them all of the right techniques, and they're going to leave and not feel equipped at all to do this. In session is where you learn. And so the metaphor I always give is like uh we don't practice during the ball game, right? We don't wait for the Super Bowl to have our first practice. I want you to be practicing years before your first Super Bowl. And I want you to do it when it's easy, right? I want you to do it with your partner. I want you to do it with me here. And then we're going to do it. And my favorite thing to do is if I have a family system of partners, I will meet and like we'll all take different roles. So like one of me is good, like I'll be the loved one, somebody will be the CSO, and somebody's going to be the observer, and then we all go and rotate. And then I want to hear back from the observer. What do they notice from everybody? Right? Like, what are the things that kind of stood out to them? So now we're building in this like feedback loop where everybody is invested in giving each other feedback so that we're all kind of coaching up one another. And you're building this like internal dialogue around like catching yourself and thinking about what it would mean to give feedback. And it's really powerful. Role plays are critical to helping individuals um yeah, like figure out how to implement some of these skills. I do like it, right? It also helps the CSO develop empathy during these role plays, especially when you put them in their shoes. And now I'm gonna act as your parent for a little bit, and they have to role play them, right? Like, oh, that is hard. And I will also have the negative conversations sometimes in role plays, and I'll be really stern and strict, right? And say, hey, I need you to go pack your shit and get out of my house. I cannot have you using here. We have a sibling, so I'm over it, right? And like get their actual words. If they're cussing, if they're not cussing, um, giving them the same information back, and then pausing and really nurturing them can be a really powerful experience for them to think about the communication they want to model moving forward. Um, Guidelines, avoid the term role plays, and use let's practice, right? It's about learning and practicing, not role plays. Um, get an adequate description of the scene before starting. So this is where I was kind of saying, like, understand the language, understand who said what and when, um, understand tone, understand how people were sitting is important, right? Like if they're like not looking and looking away, you should set things up to be as realistic to their scenario as possible. Um, this is a really important one. Use less difficult scenes first and increase difficulty with repetitions, right? So like the first one might be um a scenario that happened a long time ago that doesn't have much emotional weight to it. But by the end, we should be practicing things that are happening week over, like the things that are happening in the here and now. Um, and I already talked a little bit about feedback, but like once we're kind of done this a few times, repeat the scene a few times. And then lastly, keeping it brief. I always put on a timer. I have my watch, and I say, we're going to go for 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and then we're all part of it, right? I will also throw myself into the mix of these role plays to help them get comfortable with the idea as well. So you're really facilitating, and it's really one of the best tools that we can use. Um, Give me just a second, and I want to see if there's anything else. I'm going to jump to positive reinforcement, and then we're going to wrap up. Uh, do, do. So positive reinforcement, I think the biggest thing that we want to think about is like, I honestly, very intentionally, did not even talk about consequences, punishment, boundary setting, because we know connection is the most important thing that we can do. So positive reinforcement is about identifying behaviors we want to see more of and showing up to them in a meaningful way, right? So we don't use the term enabling at all. I don't use the words codependent or enabling. Codependent just means that you have an attachment style that wants you to be close to people because you're a human being, right? Like human beings want to be, that Sue Johnson quote, from birth to the grave, want to be close to other human beings. So let's stop labeling it as codependent and let's start talking about the distance in relationships and that we have and like how is that currently working for you. Enabling has the same thing, right? It's pejorative, but really enabling is just represents a CSO behavior that unintentionally supports drinking or drug use, right? Even more explicit, true enabling is actually the intentional supporting of drinking or drug use. So we kind of have like an accidental enabling, and then we have intentional enabling, right? It's like sometimes I accidentally go into it, sometimes I very intentionally support drinking or drug use. Craft's positive reinforcement is something that the CSO does that increases non-drinking or non-drug use, right? This is all the pro-social behavior. And so, how to begin. We first explain the differences, right? And then I really like spend time understanding like how do you respond today, right? And what do you do? And positive reinforcement's really hard for people to kind of wrap their minds around, but it's really about an investigation of like what's important to your loved one and how can you support that. A few things about reinforcers is that we settle on a specific behavior, right? So that behavior might be, I really want to reinforce when my loved one doesn't smoke weed after school, but actually comes straight home. And we identify a few inexpensive reinforcers. And again, this has to be in the loved one's mind. It's a reward, right? Not the CSOs. And so you develop a plan for implementing the reward. The last thing I'll say is we try to not offer cash. Cash has very diminutive effects when it's seen as reinforcers, right? We try and think of positive communication. And another world would do a whole list of like free positive reinforcers and then ones that you can pay for. But like, look at your loved one's life and like, what do they care about? We also try to find inexpensive ones that we can do with lots of reps, right? We don't say, hey, if you don't smoke weed for 30 days, I'll get you a bigger thing. We say, hey, if you just come home this afternoon instead of hanging out with your friends, here's how I'm going to show up to that. Right. And then we do that the next day and the next day for quite some time. So yeah. Okay. I talked a ton. We have 8 minutes left. I know Ashley has some instructions too. But I just want to share, like, I have a ton of resources in here. Um, that can be really helpful. I love the work that Partnership to End Addiction does. There's also work from the Center for Motivation and Change. NOMA here has a tremendous amount of resources. And then lastly, I wanted to shout out Ashley and the team at APC for like hosting this and just like always being such champions of the work that we do.